Hey everyone, so I've had a few questions about my dungeon build and we're going to take a look at this today. Let's go. So I'm going to dive right in with this build, and this is a build that I've been running dungeons with. I do also use it for a few other instances which I'll discuss later in the video. However, I've been feeling it's not as strong since not having any new Eternal gear for Meteor, which is what I did have with this build originally. However, my Inferno 2 gear that I'd farmed didn't have any of that. So you can see this is given 2.3 million damage per second, not a horrific amount, but you can also see here that the Meteor is not giving me much damage at all. So that's what we're going to look at swapping out today and see if we can make this build even stronger. So I'm going to swap to my dungeon build that is my updated build, and we'll see if this gives any more damage. Now you might be wondering why I'm stood so close to the test dummy. The reason for this is the essence we're using on Lightning Nova, which is Sprite Spark, and this won't actually give any damage to your target unless you're close to it. So obviously, although this is a range class and a range build, you do have to stand quite close to the test dummy to test Sprite Spark out. And you can see we've got a nice amount of damage here. We've got just over 3 million damage per second, which is a good increase. We have an increase in damage on Arcane Torrent because we changed some essences on that. Lightning Nova is the lowest, however that does increase your primary attack speed with one of the essences on there. And then Black Hole and Ice Armor are quite balanced as well. So we're going to test the original build and the new build side by side in Cavern of Echoes, because this is my favourite dungeon to test builds in. The build on the left is the original one, and although, as I mentioned, I've been using this for dungeons, this is also the build that I use for open world farming, Terra Rifts, Elder Rifts, and also the Abyssal Verge, because it does work really well. However, you can use this other dungeon build, the new one that we're going to go through in a second. You can use this for those instances as well. It does work really well. Both builds are pretty solid for that. However, since not having any Eternal gear for Meteor, the build on the left I'm finding is a lot weaker, especially in solo dungeon runs, because quite often I can run Cavern of Echoes solo just back to back for like an hour, but it has kind of slowed down not having that Eternal gear for Meteor. So I'm hoping I'll find some more of that, and then I will actually test the build again so that we can see if there is a difference and if there is actually a huge impact from Eternal gear. I am still finding that the Eternal magic does give more damage than having critical hit chance. So yesterday after filming this, I did find a gear piece that had another Arcane Torrent magic on it, and that was actually giving me more damage than the 3% or 4% critical hit chance that I had on the other gear piece. So it's definitely worth testing it out and definitely worth looking for the Eternal gear, running those Terra Rifts and also completing Hellslayer bounties. So now I literally only complete Hellslayer bounties. I don't do normal bounties, and it does make a difference having that gear, so definitely worth looking into. Now back to the build, you can see the new build is definitely a lot faster. We're already at the boss and taking him down, and that is the dungeon complete. So yeah, a huge difference in these two builds. The time is obviously quite a lot different here. You can see we're up to the 2-minute mark on the original build. As I said, it still works in open world and other instances, but for dungeons, definitely try the build on the right. I will go through all the essences now. Quickly before we do that, the old build finished in 2 minutes 9 seconds versus 1 minute 49 on the new one. So a huge difference there, especially if you're speed running. So we're going to go through everything except for runes, because that's going to make the video way too long. So starting off with my charm, I've got a boost on Black Hole, Magic Missile and Arcane Torrent. So those all work well in this build. For legendary gems, we're using my original setup. So we've got Blood-Soaked Jade, Starfire Shard, Roiling Consequence, Pain Clasp, Seeping Bile, Bottled Hope, Gloom Cask and Mother's Lament. I did also test Mother's Lament versus Vipers, but the Lament was better. We're using 4 pieces of Vitus with the green items, so it increases the duration of all beneficial effects on you and your party members by 30% and increases the target's attack speed by 30% for 3 seconds each time you use a skill to grant a beneficial effect to yourself or a party member. Alongside this, we're using 4 pieces of Grace, so all continual damage, channel damage and persistent ground damage is increased by 15%, and each time you damage an individual enemy 5 times, you will do 19,004 additional damage to that enemy. So that's 4 pieces of each. You could also use Angmits, that does also work nicely with this. We've got a silver lining on the helm. Starting off, we've got a resonance bonus on there, so that increases the primary attack damage. So black hole now devours the power of enemies caught within it, increasing the damage you deal by 28.5% for 6 seconds, and black hole cooldown is reduced. We're also using 4 pieces of lashed in this build, so your primary attack now has a chance to generate 3 cracking whips that target nearby enemies and deal 24% of your damage per second over 3 seconds to any enemies in their path. Additionally, when an enemy dies, while still taking damage from whip, it will explode for 12% of your damage. So that works really nicely again in this build. Lashed is probably one of the best cursed essences you can use. We've got Sprite Spark on the chest, so Lightning Nova now transfigures you into a ball of pure lightning, allowing you to move at high speed and continually deal damage to any nearby enemies. Lightning Nova damage is increased by 18% and an additional 10% there from the Awakened slot as well. Using Gelbrind on the shoulder, Ice Armor also causes your primary attacks to decrease enemy movement speed by 40% for 3.2 seconds, and Ice Armor cooldown is decreased by 10%, so I actually like Ice Armor. It does actually give a decent amount of damage. Novel Castigation on the pants. Arcane Torrent also fires tracking missiles that seek out enemies, dealing 13,673 damage. Damage is increased by 90% and an additional 10% from the Awakened slot. We're also using 4 pieces of Wired on the cursed gear, so after you kill an enemy, release a surge of lightning that jumps 6 times between nearby enemies and deals 60% of your damage to them. Additionally, damage dealt to enemies hit by surge is increased by 9%. The effect cannot occur more often than once every 15 seconds. Rift Carver on the main hand. Arcane Torrent now creates a chaotic orb that moves with you and fires arcane missiles at random nearby enemies. Arcane Torrent damage increased 18% and an additional 10% from the Awakened slot. Heart of the Storm on the offhand. Ice Armor becomes Storm Armor, continually damaging nearby enemies. Ice Armor damage is increased by 18% and an additional 10% from the Awakened slot. All Rustic on the alternate main hand. Lightning Nova also increases your primary attack speed by 30% for 4.8 seconds, and damage is increased by 10% from the Awakened slot. So that one works really nicely, and I do like that. And lastly, we're using Chaos Rapture. So again, I've got some bonus resonance attributes on there: primary attack damage increase and skill damage increase. So Black Hole instead conjures an unstable star which explodes when it expires, damaging nearby enemies. Black hole damage is increased by 18% and black hole cooldown is decreased by 10%. So all in all, that all works really nicely together, I find, and as I said, it's quite a strong build. We use the Protector buff in dungeons, so basically damage taken is reduced, which isn't the reason why I use it. It has all of these different buffs from the remnants that my warband have found. However, what I use it for is the increase in your life and size, because the increase in size will make it much faster to run through dungeons, even without having to use that Brawler Paragon. So you can just use this, or you could use this and Brawler Paragon if you want to have that extra speed. We're using the Slinger Paragon tree with Unseen Dynamism, so you know that this is one of my favourite. You basically use a mixture of primary and skill attacks, and that will stack your damage. So Unseen Dynamism is a really good skill, and this Slinger tree is really good for damage. We're using Fury, so using a skill while in combat increases your critical hit chance by 1% for 10 seconds, and it stacks up to 5 times. We're using Uncanny. While you have 10 or more stacks of Unseen Dynamism, you will gain Uncanny, which increases your critical hit chance by 6.5%. Gifted Unseen Dynamism can now stack up to 15 times. And lastly, Deadly Intent damage is increased by 2%. So basically we're using this Paragon to stack as much damage and stack that critical hit chance as well. But that is basically it from me today. I hope you found this video helpful. If you have any questions, let me know, or if you have any ideas on how to make this build even stronger, or what builds you're using for dungeons, please let me know in the comments. Now, I might get questions about why I'm not using the Disintegrate Shoulder with Arcane Deputy. The reason for that is I've heard a lot of people saying it's bugged and not giving as much damage as it was previously, and I did test it out and it wasn't too different to this new build that I have just shown you today. So I hope you found it helpful, as I said, and as always, thanks for watching and have a great day.